The taxi stopped beneath the glittering lights of Harare's most luxurious hotel, but before the elderly driver could even smile, Nyasha Moyo threw the door open and shouted loud enough for every guest to hear. "Men like you should never be allowed near decent people," she snapped, tossing a few worthless coins onto the pavement. Laughter spread through the crowd as the quiet driver simply bent down and picked them up without a word. Moments later, the ballroom doors opened and the same humble man walked inside, not as a taxi driver, but as the billionaire owner of the company, where Nyasha's husband had spent 15 years building his career. In one careless moment, she had destroyed far more than her pride. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. We'd love to know how far our stories travel. And if you enjoy emotional stories about justice, hope, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss our next journey. Harare woke slowly beneath a pale blue sky, its streets filling with commuter buses, fruit vendors, office workers, and the impatient sound of car horns. In the quiet northern suburb of Borrowdale, Nyasha Moyo stood before a tall mirror in her dressing room and adjusted the gold chain around her neck for the third time. She was 34 years old, elegant, intelligent, and deeply aware of how others saw her. Her smooth, dark brown skin glowed beneath the morning light, and her carefully styled black hair rested against the shoulders of a cream silk blouse. Everything about her appearance had been chosen to communicate success. Yet Nyasha did not feel successful. She lived in a beautiful house, drove a polished black SUV, attended private events, and belonged to social circles many women only saw in magazines. Still, whenever she scrolled through photographs of business leaders, politicians, and wealthy families, an uncomfortable voice whispered that she had not yet reached the life she deserved. Behind her, Tawanda Moyo fastened the cuffs of his white shirt. "You have changed your necklace 3 times, he said gently. Nyasha met his eyes through the mirror. The first one looked cheap. "It was a gift from your mother. That does not make it suitable for every occasion." Tawanda lowered his gaze and continued dressing. He had learned that some conversations were not worth beginning before breakfast. At 38, Tawanda was a respected senior operations manager at Dubé Capital Holdings, one of Zimbabwe's fastest-growing investment companies. He was tall, calm, and known for remembering the names of junior employees. His colleagues trusted him because he listened before speaking and accepted responsibility when projects failed. For 15 years, he had worked steadily without scandal or shortcuts. His salary had built their comfortable home, supported Nyasha's small interior design business, and paid the school fees of his late sister's son in Bulawayo. But lately, none of that seemed enough for his wife. Nyasha turned from the mirror. "Did Mr. Chikawore say anything about the executive promotion?" "Not yet, but the decision is this week." "Yes, and you are still acting as though it does not matter." Tawanda picked up his navy jacket. "It matters. I just do not want my whole life to depend on one title." Nyasha's expression tightened. "That is easy to say when you are not the one answering questions at dinners." "What questions?" She folded her arms. "People ask what position my husband holds. They ask which neighborhood we live in. They ask whether we have bought property in South Africa. You may pretend those things do not matter, but they do. To whom? To everyone." Tawanda studied her face. He remembered the young woman he had married 11 years earlier, a schoolteacher's daughter who once packed leftover food after church gatherings and delivered it to elderly neighbors. That Nyasha had laughed easily and worn simple dresses without shame. The change had not happened overnight. It began after she attended events with wealthier women whose husbands owned businesses, mines, and construction companies. At first, she admired their confidence. Then she began comparing. Soon, comparison became embarrassment, and embarrassment became hunger. A hunger for respect. A hunger no amount of comfort could satisfy. Tawanda walked toward her and rested a hand on her shoulder. You do not have to prove anything to those people. Nyasha stepped away. That is what people say when they have stopped trying. The words landed harder than she intended, but she did not apologize. Tawanda quietly left the room. In another part of Harare, far from Borrowdale's guarded homes, Tendai Dube sat behind the wheel of an old blue taxi parked beside a row of jacaranda trees. The vehicle had faded paint, a cracked dashboard, and a small wooden cross hanging from the rearview mirror. Anyone passing by would have assumed its owner was an ordinary driver, waiting for the morning rush. Tendai preferred it that way. At 56, he carried himself with the calm confidence of a man who did not need recognition. His deep brown face showed faint lines around the eyes, and his short, graying hair was hidden beneath a worn cap. He wore a simple brown jacket over a pale shirt and dark trousers, polished clean despite their age. He opened a small notebook and wrote down the previous day's observations. A security guard had helped an elderly passenger carry bags without being asked. A restaurant manager had shouted at a cleaner for breaking a glass. A young accountant had paid extra after realizing Tendai had taken a longer route to avoid flooding. These details mattered to him. Years earlier, before Dube Capital Holdings occupied glass towers and employed hundreds of people, Tendai had driven taxis at night to pay university fees. He remembered hunger rejection and the humiliation of being invisible. Success had not erased those memories. It had made them sharper. Now, several times each year, he returned to the streets in disguise. He drove ordinary passengers, listened to their conversations, and watched how they treated someone they believed had no influence. His board members called the habit unnecessary. Tendai called it education. His phone vibrated. The message came from Farai Chikawore, chairman of the company's executive committee. The gala arrangements are confirmed. Senior leadership has been informed that you will attend. Tendai read the message twice before replying. Do not circulate my photograph. I want to arrive without ceremony. A second message appeared almost immediately. The promotion committee also meets tomorrow. Tawanda Moyo remains the strongest candidate. Tendai leaned back and considered the name. He knew Tawanda's reports. He knew the man had refused a profitable deal after discovering hidden environmental violations. He knew junior staff described him as fair. What Tendai did not know was who Tawanda became outside the office. A file could reveal performance. It could not reveal character. Back at the Moyo home, Nyasha entered the dining room and found breakfast untouched on Tawanda's plate. Their housekeeper, Rudo, stood near the kitchen doorway, holding a tray. Madam, should I keep his tea warm? Nyasha glanced at the clock. He has already gone. Rudo nodded and began clearing the table. A spoon slipped from the tray and struck the tiled floor. Nyasha turned sharply. Must you make noise every morning? I am sorry, madam. You are always sorry after doing something careless. Rudo bent to pick up the spoon. She was a quiet widow in her late 40s who had worked for the family for 6 years. Tawanda often asked about her children. Nyasha rarely remembered their names. As Rudo straightened, Nyasha noticed a loose thread on the woman's apron, and replaced that apron before tomorrow. We may have important visitors this week. Yes, madam. Nyasha walked away without seeing the sadness in Rudo's eyes. At Dube Capital Holdings, Tawanda entered the lobby and greeted the security guard by name. Morning blessing. How is your daughter? She is recovering well. Sir, thank you for asking. Tawanda smiled. I am glad. As he approached the elevators, his colleagues Simba and Lovu hurried toward him. You look too calm for a man whose future is being decided tomorrow, Simba said. I have done the work. The rest is not mine to control. Simba lowered his voice. The founder is coming to the gala. Tawanda paused. Mr. Dube. So they say. No one has seen him here in almost 4 years. Tawanda knew the company's billionaire founder preferred privacy, but the timing felt significant. The executive promotion would place one manager directly beneath the board. Perhaps the founder wanted to examine the candidates himself. For the first time that morning, Tawanda felt nervous. That evening, he returned home and found Nyasha surrounded by dresses, shoes, and jewelry boxes. She held up a dark red evening gown. "This one looks powerful. It is only a company gala. It is the night your life changes." "Our life," he corrected softly. Nyasha smiled, but her eyes remained fixed on her reflection. "Yes," she said, "our life." Outside, Harare's evening traffic flowed beneath the city lights. Somewhere among the buses and expensive cars, 10 days old taxi moved quietly through the streets. Nyasha had never met him. Tawanda had never seen his face. Yet within days, the dignity of one man, the ambition of another, and the pride of one woman would collide in a way none of them could escape. The morning of the annual Dubai Capital Leadership Gala arrived with unusual excitement across the company's headquarters in central Harare. Employees who normally focused only on reports and meetings now whispered in corridors, exchanged rumors over coffee, and speculated about one name: Tendai Dubé. For years, the billionaire founder had remained almost invisible. His signature appeared on major corporate decisions, his speeches were occasionally circulated through company emails, and newspapers regularly ranked him among Southern Africa's wealthiest entrepreneurs. Yet very few employees had actually met him in person. Some believed he spent most of his time overseas. Others claimed he managed the company through private advisors. A few even insisted he had retired completely. No one seemed certain. Inside the executive conference room, senior managers gathered around a polished mahogany table. Farai Chikawore, the chairman of the executive committee, stood at the front with a folder in his hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "tonight's gala is more than a celebration of another successful financial year." The room became silent. "Our founder has personally confirmed that he will attend." Several executives exchanged surprised glances. Farai continued, "He also wishes to observe our leadership team before tomorrow's promotion announcement." The words immediately changed the atmosphere. Until now, every manager had assumed the board alone would decide the company's next executive director. Now, the founder himself would be watching. Everyone suddenly became far more careful about every detail. Every handshake, every conversation, every impression. Tawanda Moyo remained quiet. He opened his notebook and continued writing a few final comments about the logistics report he planned to present that evening. Across the table, another manager, Julius Ncuba, leaned closer. "You don't seem nervous." Tawanda smiled politely. "I've learned that worrying rarely improves performance." Julius laughed. "Easy for you to say. Everyone thinks you're getting promoted." Tawanda closed his notebook. "Nothing has been decided. But everyone knows you've been leading the strongest division." "I still have to earn it." Farai overheard the conversation. "Exactly," he said. "No one has earned anything until the board announces it." The room fell quiet once more. The meeting ended shortly afterward, but tension remained inside every executive. Outside the conference room, younger employees gathered around the elevators. "Do you think the founder is strict?" one analyst asked. "I heard he fired an executive after watching him insult a receptionist." "No, that's just a rumor. I've never even seen his picture." "Neither have I." Tawanda walked past them without joining the conversation. He disliked gossip. He preferred facts. Back in Borodale, Nyasha had transformed the master bedroom into what looked like a fashion showroom. 3 evening gowns hung from wardrobe doors. Several pairs of designer shoes covered the carpet. Jewelry sparkled across the dressing table. She stood in front of another mirror comparing earrings. Her closest friend, Rutendo Chirenge, sat nearby, holding a cup of tea. "You've been choosing accessories for almost 2 hours," Rutendo laughed. "This event matters." "So does sleeping," Nyasha smiled. "You don't understand." Rutendo raised an eyebrow. "Then explain." Nyasha carefully placed a diamond bracelet onto her wrist. "Tonight, every important executive in Zimbabwe will be there." So first impressions matter." Rutendo looked around the room. "You already look successful." "Successful isn't enough." "What is?" Nyasha answered without hesitation. "Memorable." Rutendo sighed softly. "You've changed." Nyasha stopped adjusting her bracelet. "What do you mean?" "When we were younger, you wanted people to remember your kindness." She paused. "Now you want them to remember your handbag." Silence settled between them. Nyasha forced a laugh. "That's unfair." "Is it?" Rutendo spoke gently, not accusingly. "I miss the woman who didn't care whether someone arrived in an expensive car." Nyasha looked away. "The world judges people." "Some people do." "No." Nyasha shook her head. "Everyone does." Rutendo wanted to disagree. Instead, she simply changed the subject. "What time does the gala begin?" 7. "And Tawanda?" "He'll come directly from work." Rutendo nodded. "I hope tonight brings him the promotion." Nyasha smiled. "It will." There wasn't confidence in her voice. There was expectation. Meanwhile, several kilometers away, Tendai Dube slowly washed his old blue taxi by hand. A young mechanic from the neighborhood walked over. "Baba Tendai," he called with a smile. "You're cleaning it again," Tendai laughed quietly. "A taxi should always be clean." The mechanic looked puzzled. "If I had your driving experience, I'd buy a newer one. This one still serves people." "People laugh at old cars." "Some do." "And it doesn't bother you," Tendai finished drying the windshield. "Son, the opinions of strangers are usually the cheapest things they own." The mechanic smiled without fully understanding. "You always say strange things. One day they'll make sense." After the mechanic left, Tendai opened the passenger door and inspected the interior. Everything was spotless. Simple, comfortable, exactly as he wanted. His phone rang. Farai Chikawore. "Good afternoon, Mr. Dube." "Good afternoon, Farai." "Everything is ready. I'll arrive later." "The board members are eager to welcome you." "I don't need welcoming." Farai smiled despite knowing Tendai couldn't see him. "There is one more matter." "I'm listening." "Tawanda Moyo." "What about him?" "The board unanimously recommends him for executive director." "And your opinion?" "I agree." Tendai remained silent for several seconds. Finally, he asked, "Have you ever seen how he treats people outside this building?" Farai hesitated. "No." "Neither have I." "Do you have concerns?" "I have questions." "What kind?" "The kind no interview can answer." The call ended. Tendai placed the phone inside his pocket before starting the engine. As the old taxi rolled away from the curb, pedestrians barely glanced at it. No one recognized the man behind the wheel. No one imagined he controlled billions of dollars in investments. No one suspected that, before attending the most important corporate gala of the year, Zimbabwe's richest businessman intended to spend several more hours driving ordinary passengers through Harare. Across the city, Tawanda completed his final meeting and packed his briefcase. His assistant entered quietly. "Sir, your wife called twice." "Did she leave a message?" "She reminded you not to be late." Tawanda smiled. "That sounds like Nyasha." As he looked through his office window, the city stretched toward the horizon beneath the golden afternoon sun. He thought about tomorrow's promotion, about the years of sacrifice, about the employees depending on his leadership. What he did not know was that fate had already arranged a meeting far more important than any interview. Somewhere on the busy streets of Harare, an old blue taxi was waiting, and before the night was over, one ordinary ride would change 3 lives forever. The afternoon sun hung low over Harare, casting a golden glow across the city's crowded streets. Office workers hurried toward bus stops, vendors called out the last prices of the day, and traffic thickened around every major intersection. Inside Duby Capital Holdings, Tawanda glanced at his watch. 5 o'clock. The gala would begin in 2 hours. He quickly gathered the documents he needed, locked his office, and called Nyasha. She answered almost immediately. "Where are you?" "Leaving the office now." "You'd better not be late." "I won't. I've spent all day getting ready." "I know. And remember, tonight is important." "It is." She paused before lowering her voice. "Tawanda, this promotion changes everything." He smiled faintly. "I hope so." "It must." The call ended. Tawanda walked towards the underground parking garage, unaware that heavy traffic caused by a collision near Samora Machel Avenue had already brought much of central Harare to a standstill. Meanwhile, Nyasha admired herself one final time before stepping outside. She wore an elegant emerald green evening gown that flowed gracefully to the floor. Gold earrings framed her face, and a matching necklace rested against her neck. Her makeup was flawless, her perfume subtle but expensive. She looked exactly like the woman she wanted the world to see: confident, successful, important. She climbed into her black luxury SUV and instructed her driver. "Rainbow Towers Hotel." "Yes, madam." The vehicle pulled away smoothly. For nearly 20 minutes, they moved through traffic without difficulty. Then everything stopped. Cars stretched as far as Nyasha could see. Drivers leaned on their horns. Motorcycles squeezed between vehicles. A police officer redirected traffic around the accident ahead. The chauffeur looked into the rearview mirror. "Madame, this may take some time." "How much time?" "I cannot say." Nyasha checked her phone. 6 o'clock. The gala reception would begin in less than an hour. Her irritation grew. "We cannot sit here." "There is no way through." She looked out the window and noticed people walking along the sidewalk toward the hotel district. "How far is the hotel?" "About 3 kilometers." She frowned. "I am not walking." The chauffeur hesitated. "We could try finding another vehicle from the next street." Nyasha immediately opened the door. "Fine." She stepped carefully onto the pavement, lifting her dress slightly to avoid dust. The chauffeur followed. After walking 1 block away from the traffic jam, they reached a quieter street where a handful of taxis waited beneath large jacaranda trees. Most were newer sedans. One stood apart, an old blue taxi with faded paint. Its engine idled quietly. The driver sat patiently behind the wheel, reading a small notebook. Nyasha barely glanced at the other taxis before noticing that the newer ones were already occupied. Only the old blue taxi remained. She sighed loudly. "Seriously," the chauffeur spoke softly. "It may be the only one available." Nyasha rolled her eyes. Wonderful. She approached the vehicle. The driver immediately stepped out and opened the rear door. "Good evening, madam." His voice was calm and respectful. "My name is Tendai." Nyasha looked at him from head to toe. His brown jacket showed signs of age. His shoes were polished but worn. The taxi itself looked old enough to belong in a museum. She wrinkled her nose. "Does this thing actually run?" Tendai smiled politely. "It has brought many people safely to their destinations." "That wasn't my question." "Yes, madame." She looked inside the vehicle. The seats were clean. The interior smelled fresh. Everything appeared well-maintained despite its age. Still, appearances mattered more to her than cleanliness. "You really should replace this taxi." Tendai nodded gently. "Perhaps one day, if you ever earn enough." He simply smiled. Nyasha climbed into the back seat without thanking him. The chauffeur leaned toward the window. "I'll collect your vehicle later, madam. Make sure it arrives before midnight." "Yes." Tendai closed the door carefully before returning to the driver's seat. "Rainbow Towers Hotel." "Obviously." He started driving. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Soft instrumental music played quietly through the radio. Outside, Harare bustled with evening life. Street vendors packed away vegetables. Children laughed while chasing one another between apartment buildings. Young professionals hurried toward restaurants after work. Tendai drove steadily, never accelerating aggressively, despite the growing traffic. Nyasha checked her watch again. "We're moving too slowly. The roads are busy. Take a shortcut." "I know one." He turned onto a quieter residential road lined with flowering trees. The route avoided much of the congestion. Even so, Nyasha remained impatient. "What year is this taxi?" Tendai chuckled softly. "Old enough to have many stories." "I asked what year." "It has served faithfully for many years." She laughed dismissively. "I can't imagine anyone choosing to ride in this thing." "Many people do. They probably have no choice." Tendai remained silent. Nyasha continued. "You know, image matters." "It can. If I drove something like this, people would think I'd failed in life." He kept his eyes on the road. "Sometimes people see only what they expect." She shook her head. "No, people judge what they see." "Perhaps. You sound like someone who has accepted being poor." For the first time, Tendai glanced briefly into the rearview mirror. "I've accepted many things." "Like what?" "That respect costs nothing." Nyasha laughed again. "Respect doesn't pay bills." "No. It doesn't buy houses." "No. It certainly doesn't buy luxury cars." "No." He smiled gently. "But it makes every journey lighter." She folded her arms. "You speak like a philosopher." "I've simply met many people." "I'm sure." The taxi stopped at the red light. An elderly woman carrying heavy grocery bags struggled to cross the street. Without hesitation, Tendai activated the hazard lights and waited several extra seconds after the signal turned green until she reached the opposite sidewalk safely. The driver behind them honked angrily. Nyasha sighed dramatically. Now we're waiting for pedestrians too. She needed time. So does everyone. She needed it more. Nyasha looked away toward the window. She couldn't understand why such a simple man behaved with such quiet confidence. Most drivers she encountered apologized constantly. This one never argued, never became defensive, never appeared embarrassed. His calmness irritated her almost as much as the old taxi itself. A few minutes later, the elegant towers of the luxury hotel appeared ahead. Rows of expensive vehicles lined the entrance. Luxury SUVs, executive sedans, imported sports cars. Nyasha immediately noticed them. "See?" She gestured toward the parking area. "Those are the kinds of cars successful people drive." Tendai slowed near the entrance. "They are beautiful." "And then there's yours." He smiled. "It brought you here." She gave a short laugh. "I sincerely hope no one important saw me getting out of this taxi." Tendai gently applied the brakes. The vehicle came to a smooth stop beneath the hotel's bright entrance lights. Uniformed attendants hurried toward arriving guests. Security guards stood beside polished glass doors. Well-dressed couples entered the ballroom while photographers captured the evening. Nyasha looked outside and quietly adjusted her necklace. The embarrassment she had tried to ignore during the ride suddenly returned. She was determined that no one would connect her elegant appearance with the old taxi waiting behind her. Without realizing it, she was about to make a decision that would alter far more than her evening. It would change the course of every life connected to hers. The entrance of the Rainbow Towers Hotel shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers and rows of golden lights. Luxury vehicles arrived one after another, their doors opened by uniformed attendants, while photographers captured smiling executives and elegantly dressed couples. Nyasha stared through the taxi window. Her heart tightened. She had imagined stepping gracefully from a luxury SUV, not from an aging blue taxi that looked completely out of place among imported Mercedes Range Rovers and Bentleys. For a brief moment, she considered asking the driver to stop farther away. Instead, she reached for the door. Tendai immediately stepped out and opened it for her. "Please watch your step, madam." Nyasha climbed out without acknowledging him. She quickly smoothed her emerald gown before looking around. Several guests were already entering the hotel. A few security guards stood only a few meters away. Hotel attendants welcomed arriving visitors with polite smiles. To Nyasha's relief, nobody appeared to recognize her. She reached into her designer handbag and removed several small Zimbabwean dollar notes. Without even looking at Tendai, she dropped the money onto the front passenger seat. "There." Tendai glanced down. "Madam." She interrupted him immediately. "That should be enough." He spoke gently. "The fare is a little higher because we took the longer route around the accident." Nyasha finally turned toward him. "What did you say?" "The total fare is displayed on the meter." She looked through the open window. The digital meter showed an amount noticeably higher than the money she had thrown inside. Her expression hardened. "You expect me to pay that?" "It is simply the correct fare." She laughed sarcastically. "For this old taxi." Several nearby hotel attendants glanced toward the conversation. Tendai remained calm. "The fare is based on distance, madam." Nyasha folded her arms. "You drivers always find ways to overcharge people." "I assure you the meter calculates automatically." "So now you're calling me dishonest?" "No." "But you were questioning me." "I am only explaining the fare." Her voice became louder. "I've ridden better taxis for half this price." A hotel porter slowed his pace while listening. Two businessmen entering the lobby briefly looked in their direction. Tendai noticed the growing attention. He lowered his voice even further. "I do not wish to inconvenience you." "Then stop arguing." "I am not arguing." "You are." He took a slow breath. "If paying the full amount causes difficulty, you may simply pay what you believe is fair." His calm response somehow irritated Nyasha even more. She expected resistance. Instead, she found quiet dignity. To her, it almost felt like silent judgment. She stepped closer. "You know what your problem is?" Tendai remained silent. "You people never understand your place." The words caused several nearby conversations to stop. A security guard discreetly looked toward them. Nyasha continued. "You drive an old taxi." "Yes." "You wear old clothes." "Yes." "And yet you behave as though you're equal to your customers." Tendai answered softly. "We are all people, madam." She laughed loudly. "No." The laughter of two young guests nearby encouraged her. "We are not." The security supervisor slowly approached. "Is everything all right here, madam?" Nyasha answered before Tendai could speak. "This driver is trying to cheat me." The supervisor looked toward Tendai. "Sir." Tendai shook his head. "There has been a misunderstanding." Nyasha pointed toward the taxi. "He deliberately took unnecessary roads. There was an accident on the main avenue." "I don't care." She looked around, aware more people were now watching. If you cannot afford a proper vehicle, at least learn honesty. The words spread through the small crowd. Some guests whispered quietly. Others simply watched. The hotel receptionist, standing inside the entrance, frowned slightly. Something about the driver's calmness seemed unusual. Tendai reached into the taxi. He picked up the money she had thrown inside. Then, instead of placing it into his pocket, he held it toward her. "You may keep it." Nyasha stared at him. "What? I will not charge you." Her eyes narrowed. "So now you're pretending to be generous. I simply hope your evening goes well." She shook her head. "I don't need charity." "You misunderstand." "No." She pushed his hand away. Several coins slipped from his fingers onto the polished pavement. The metallic sound echoed beneath the hotel entrance. A few guests turned completely toward them. Nyasha pointed at the scattered coins. "Pick them up." Silence. "You heard me." Tendai looked at the ground. Then, without anger or hesitation, he slowly bent down. One by one, he collected every coin. His movements were calm, careful, unhurried. The crowd watched without speaking. One elderly hotel attendant quietly lowered his eyes. A young waitress looked visibly uncomfortable. Even the security supervisor shifted awkwardly. Something about the scene felt wrong. Nyasha watched without sympathy. When Tendai finally stood again, she spoke loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Next time, remember that respectable people don't arrive in broken taxis." A few nervous laughs came from guests who wanted to avoid awkwardness. Others remained silent. Tendai carefully placed the coins into his pocket. Then he looked directly at Nyasha. His expression held neither anger nor humiliation, only kindness. "I truly hope your evening brings you happiness, madam." She gave a dismissive smile. "It already has." Turning on her heel, she walked confidently toward the hotel entrance. The emerald gown flowed elegantly behind her. She believed the incident had ended. Behind her, the security supervisor quietly approached Tendai. "I'm sorry about that." Tendai smiled. "There is nothing to apologize for. You handled it with remarkable patience. I've learned that anger usually creates two victims instead of one." The supervisor nodded thoughtfully. "I don't think I could have remained so calm." Tendai looked toward the brightly lit ballroom. "Everyone carries burdens we cannot see." With that, he returned to the driver's seat. Instead of leaving immediately, he sat quietly with both hands resting on the steering wheel. His eyes remained fixed on the grand entrance. A faint smile appeared on his face. Not a smile of revenge, not satisfaction, simply understanding. Inside the hotel lobby, Nyasha quickly forgot the incident. She greeted several acquaintances with warm smiles that seemed entirely different from the woman outside moments earlier. "Oh, Nyasha!" A wealthy businessman's wife embraced her. "You look absolutely stunning." "Thank you. We've been waiting for you." Nyasha smiled confidently. "The traffic was terrible." "I'm just glad you made it." As they walked toward the ballroom, another executive recognized Tawanda approaching from the opposite corridor. "There he is," Nyasha waved happily. Tawanda smiled after seeing her. "You arrived safely?" "Barely." She laughed lightly. "You wouldn't believe the terrible taxi I had to take." Tawanda frowned. "What happened?" "Oh, nothing important." She dismissed the conversation with a wave. "Just an arrogant driver who needed to learn some manners." Tawanda looked concerned. "You weren't too hard on him, were you?" Nyasha seemed almost offended. "He deserved it." Before Tawanda could ask another question, the ballroom lights dimmed slightly. A voice echoed through the grand hall. "Ladies and gentlemen." Every conversation immediately stopped. the chairman of Dubé Capital Holdings, slowly stepped onto the stage. The evening's special guest has arrived. Outside, the old blue taxi quietly pulled away from the hotel entrance. No one watching would have imagined that its humble driver was about to return within the next few minutes through an entirely different entrance. And when he did, every person who had witnessed Nyasha's cruel humiliation would suddenly understand why he had remained so calm. The greatest surprise of the night had only just begun. Inside the grand ballroom of Rainbow Towers Hotel, crystal chandeliers reflected warm golden light across polished marble floors. Round tables draped in ivory linen filled the room, each decorated with fresh white lilies and silver candle holders. Waiters moved gracefully between guests, carrying trays of sparkling drinks, while a string quartet played softly near the stage. Executives from across Zimbabwe's business community greeted one another with polished smiles. Every conversation eventually drifted toward the same subject: the founder. No one knew exactly when he would appear. Tawanda guided Nyasha toward their assigned table near the front of the ballroom. "This is a good location," Nyasha whispered, pleased. "It means the company values your position." Tawanda smiled politely, but remained distracted. He kept thinking about her earlier comment. "Tell me honestly," he said quietly as they sat down. "What happened with the taxi driver?" Nyasha reached for a glass of water. "Why are you still thinking about that? You sounded upset." "He tried charging more than the ride was worth." "Did he?" "Of course." Tawanda studied her expression. "Are you sure it wasn't because of the traffic?" Nyasha frowned. "So, now you believe him instead of me?" "I wasn't there." "Exactly." She leaned closer. "You should have seen that taxi." "What about it?" "It looked like it belonged in a scrapyard." Tawanda gave a small sigh. "That doesn't make the driver dishonest." "It certainly doesn't make him respectable." He remained silent. Something about her answer unsettled him. Across the ballroom, Farai Chikawore spoke with members of the board near the stage. Everything appeared perfectly organized. The media had been instructed not to photograph the founder until he personally approved. Only a handful of senior directors knew why. Farai glanced at his watch. 7:20. He quietly excused himself and walked toward a private corridor behind the ballroom. One security officer stepped aside immediately. "Has Mr. Dubé arrived?" "Not through the main entrance, sir." Farai nodded. "He won't." He continued walking until reaching a private elevator reserved for executive use. The doors remained closed. He waited patiently. Meanwhile, outside the hotel, Tendai parked the old blue taxi inside an underground service garage hidden from public view. He switched off the engine and sat quietly for a moment. The silence allowed him to replay the evening in his mind. Nyasha's words, the scattered coins, the laughter. None of it surprised him. He had experienced similar moments many times during the years he disguised himself as an ordinary driver. What stayed with him wasn't the humiliation. It was how easily people revealed themselves when they believed someone possessed no power. He reached into the glove compartment and removed a small leather travel bag. Inside hung a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, fresh white shirt, deep blue silk tie, polished black shoes. Everything had been prepared earlier that morning. Within 15 minutes, the elderly taxi driver disappeared. Standing before the mirror inside a private changing room was a completely different man, confident, distinguished, powerful. The lines on his face remained, his calm eyes remained, but the worn jacket and faded cap had vanished. Anyone seeing him now would immediately recognize the presence of someone accustomed to leading nations' most influential business figures. Tendai adjusted his cufflinks before quietly leaving the room. Back inside the ballroom, conversations continued. A senior finance director approached Tawanda's table. "Congratulations." Tawanda looked surprised. "For what?" "I've heard excellent things." "Nothing has been announced." The director smiled knowingly. "Not officially." After he walked away, Nyasha leaned toward her husband. "You see? I heard speculation. I heard certainty. 12 hours from now, we'll know." She squeezed his hand. "No." She smiled confidently. "We already know." Nearby, another executive joined the discussion. "I heard Mr. Dubé personally reviewed every promotion candidate." Someone else responded. "I've never even seen him." "My cousin says he's incredibly demanding. I heard he notices everything." "No wonder nobody wants to disappoint him." Those words lingered in Tawanda's mind. Notices everything. For reasons he couldn't explain, he suddenly remembered the taxi driver Nyasha had described. He imagined an ordinary man finishing work after a long day. He imagined someone trying to earn an honest living. He quietly hoped the confrontation had not been as serious as it sounded. At that moment, the ballroom lights dimmed slightly. The music stopped. Farai Chikawore stepped onto the stage. His voice carried easily across the room. "Good evening, distinguished guests." Applause filled the ballroom. "Tonight we celebrate another remarkable year for Dubé Capital Holdings." More applause followed. "But before recognizing our outstanding employees, it is my privilege to welcome someone whose vision transformed a small investment office into one of Africa's most respected financial institutions." The room became completely silent. For many years, he has chosen to remain away from public attention. Every eye fixed on the stage. But tonight, he joins us in person. Nyasha straightened in her chair. Tawanda unconsciously adjusted his tie. Farai smiled warmly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he paused, "please welcome our founder and chairman." The ballroom doors at the rear slowly opened. Everyone turned. A tall man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit entered beside two discreet security officers. His posture was calm, his pace unhurried. Several board members immediately stood. Then the entire ballroom rose to its feet. Thunderous applause echoed through the hall. Nyasha smiled politely while trying to see the man's face. The distance made it difficult. As he moved slowly between the tables, guests respectfully stepped aside. Closer, closer. Then Tawanda froze. His eyes widened. The face looked strangely familiar. Impossible. He blinked several times. The man continued approaching the stage, now only a few meters away. Nyasha finally saw him clearly. The smile disappeared from her face. The color drained from her cheeks. Her breathing stopped. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. No, it couldn't be. The elegant businessman greeting board members with quiet confidence. The billionaire founder receiving a standing ovation from hundreds of executives. The man every employee respected. Was the same quiet taxi driver she had mocked less than an hour earlier outside the hotel. The same man who had bent down to collect scattered coins from the pavement. The same man she had declared unworthy of respectable people. Tawanda slowly turned toward his wife. She could not speak. She could barely breathe. Farai's voice echoed proudly through the silent ballroom. "Please join me in welcoming Mr. Tendai Dubé." Applause exploded once again. Only this time, neither Nyasha nor Tawanda moved. Both remained frozen in their seats, realizing that a single cruel encounter outside the hotel had just become the most important moment of their lives. The applause rolled through the ballroom like thunder. Executives, board members, investors, and honored guests remained standing, smiling with admiration as Tendai Dubé walked toward the stage. Some reached out to shake his hand. Others nodded respectfully as he passed. Only one table remained frozen in silence. Nyasha could not move. Her fingers clutched the edge of the white tablecloth so tightly that her knuckles turned pale. The confident smile she had worn all evening had completely disappeared. Her heart pounded against her chest. Impossible. There had to be some mistake. She stared at the man's face again. The same calm brown eyes, the same gentle smile, the same voice that had quietly wished her happiness only minutes earlier. Everything matched, except now he wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit instead of the faded brown jacket. Tawanda noticed the fear spreading across his wife's face. "What is it?" She struggled to answer. "Tawanda." Her voice barely escaped her lips. "That's him." He frowned. "Who?" "The taxi driver." For several seconds, Tawanda simply stared at her. Then he looked back toward the stage, toward Tendai Dube, back at Nyasha, again toward the stage. Understanding slowly settled across his face. "No," he whispered. Nyasha nodded weakly. I didn't know." Tawanda felt the room begin to spin. He remembered every rumor about the company's founder, how almost no one knew what he looked like, how he avoided publicity, how he disliked unnecessary attention. Everything suddenly made sense. The founder had been sitting behind the wheel of that old blue taxi, the man his wife had humiliated in front of dozens of strangers. Tawanda lowered his head. 15 years. 15 years of honest work. Years spent arriving early, staying late, refusing bribes, protecting employees, sacrificing weekends, missing family celebrations. Had everything been destroyed in 10 careless minutes? On stage, Farai handed the microphone to Tendai. The billionaire smiled warmly. "Please." His calm voice filled the ballroom. "Sit down." The audience obeyed immediately. Tendai looked around the room, slowly making eye contact with table after table. When his gaze reached Nyasha's table, it paused for only a brief second. His expression did not change. No anger, no bitterness, no satisfaction. He simply continued scanning the room. That frightened Nyasha even more. She had expected him to expose her, to point directly at her, to tell everyone what she had done outside. Instead, nothing. His silence felt heavier than any accusation. Tendai began speaking. "When I founded Dube Capital Holdings 26 years ago, I owned one old taxi." Soft laughter spread across the audience. Many assumed he was sharing an inspiring success story. Only Nyasha felt her stomach tighten. "I drove passengers during the day," Tendai continued, "and at night I studied finance under streetlights because electricity was often unreliable where I lived." Several younger employees listened with admiration. "I learned something during those years." He paused. "Money changes where people invite you." Another pause. "But character determines whether you deserve the invitation." The ballroom became completely silent. Nyasha lowered her eyes. Every word seemed directed at her. Although Tendai never looked her way, he continued calmly. "Our company has never been built on money alone. It has been built on trust, respect, integrity, and the belief that every human being deserves dignity." The final sentence struck Nyasha like a physical blow. She remembered the scattered coins, the laughter, the words she had spoken. "You people never understand your place." She wished she could disappear. At the neighboring table, Julius Nakube leaned toward another executive. "No wonder he's respected." "I've never heard him speak before." "Neither have I. He doesn't sound like most billionaires." On stage, Tendai smiled gently. "I've often been asked why I avoid publicity." He looked thoughtfully across the room. "The answer is simple. I learn more when nobody recognizes me." A murmur spread through the audience. Several board members smiled knowingly. Most employees looked confused. Tendai continued. When people believe you are ordinary, they stop performing. They stop pretending. They reveal who they really are. Tawanda slowly closed his eyes. The meaning behind those words could not have been clearer. Beside him, Nyasha felt tears beginning to form. Not because she had been embarrassed, because for the first time she truly understood what she had done. She had not insulted a billionaire. She had insulted a man she believed had no value. That realization hurt far more. Tendai concluded his speech with a warm smile. Tonight we celebrate excellence. But tomorrow, he paused once more. We celebrate leadership. Thunderous applause filled the ballroom again. As Tendai stepped away from the microphone, senior board members gathered around him. Executives eagerly introduced themselves. Investors requested photographs. Guests lined up, hoping for a brief conversation. Nyasha remained seated, unable to move. Tawanda finally spoke. Tell me everything. She looked at him. Everything. Her voice trembled. I complained about the taxi. He waited silently. I refused to pay. His heart sank. I accused him of cheating. His breathing became heavier. There were people watching. How many? I don't know. What else? Nyasha covered her face. I threw the money. Tawanda stared at her. She couldn't meet his eyes. I told him. She stopped. Told him what? Her shoulders shook. I said respectable people shouldn't arrive in taxis like his. Silence. Long. Painful silence. Finally, Tawanda leaned back in his chair. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He was devastated. He had spent years earning the trust of a man whose greatest value was dignity. And now, his wife had publicly stripped that dignity away. Nyasha reached for his hand. I'm sorry. He slowly pulled his hand away. You should be. She lowered her head. I didn't know who he was. Tawanda looked at her with quiet disappointment. That's exactly the problem. She looked confused. You think the mistake was insulting a billionaire. He spoke softly. The mistake was insulting someone you believed wasn't one. Those words cut deeper than anything Tendai had said. Across the ballroom, dinner service began. Waiters placed elegant meals before every guest. Conversations gradually returned. Laughter filled the room once again. Only one table remained untouched. Neither Nyasha nor Tawanda had any appetite. Farai approached their table several minutes later. Tawanda. He smiled warmly. Mr. Dubé would like to meet a few senior managers after dinner. Tawanda forced himself to smile. I'll be there. Farai nodded. And please bring your wife. The chairman walked away. Nyasha's face turned white. Tawanda! He looked toward the stage where Tendai spoke comfortably with directors and investors. There is no avoiding this now. She whispered, What if he humiliates us? Tawanda answered without taking his eyes off his employer. I don't think that's the kind of man he is. His voice became quieter. I'm more afraid that he won't. Because forgiveness from a great man was sometimes far more painful than revenge, and in less than an hour they would discover exactly which path Tendai Dubé intended to choose. Dinner passed in a blur for Nyasha. The roasted lamb, grilled vegetables, and elegant desserts placed before her remained untouched. Around the ballroom, guests laughed, exchanged business cards, and celebrated another successful year for Dubé Capital Holdings. She heard none of it. Every few seconds, her eyes drifted toward Tendai Dubé. He moved naturally from table to table, greeting junior employees with the same warmth he showed senior investors. He remembered names. He asked about families. He thanked waiters personally whenever they refilled a glass. Nothing about him resembled the arrogant billionaire Nyasha had imagined. That realization made her shame even heavier. Across the table, Tawanda quietly drank a glass of water. He had hardly spoken since learning the truth. His silence frightened Nyasha more than anger ever could. Finally, she gathered enough courage to speak. "Tawanda!" He looked at her without expression. "I'm sorry." He nodded once. "I know. I truly didn't know who he was." Again he nodded. "I believe you." She reached for his hand. "But—" He gently moved his hand away. "That isn't what hurts." Nyasha lowered her eyes. "What hurts," he continued quietly, "is that you believed someone deserved less respect because of the clothes he wore." She had no answer. For years she had judged people almost instantly. Cars, shoes, neighborhoods, professions. Without realizing it, those things had become more important than character. Tonight, that habit had finally exposed itself. At the head table, Farai Chikawore stood once again. He tapped his microphone gently. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this evening." The room gradually became quiet. In a few moments, Mr. Dubé would like to meet individually with our senior management team before tomorrow's executive announcements. Several managers straightened in their chairs. Some smiled confidently. Others suddenly appeared nervous. Farai continued. "Each manager is welcome to bring his or her spouse." Nyasha felt her stomach tighten. She whispered, "We don't have to go." Tawanda looked at her. "I cannot refuse." "What if—" She stopped speaking. "What if he dismisses you tonight?" Tawanda answered honestly. "Then I'll accept it. You worked 15 years. I know. And because of me." His expression softened for the first time that evening. "This isn't about promotion anymore." "It isn't." "No." He looked toward Tendai across the ballroom. "It's about whether the man I've respected for years still believes I deserve his trust." Those words settled heavily between them. Half an hour later, guests began moving toward smaller reception rooms surrounding the ballroom. Each senior executive had been assigned a different meeting schedule. Tawanda and Nyasha waited outside Conference Room 3. Neither spoke. Through the partially open door, they could hear quiet conversations. One manager entered smiling. He left 15 minutes later, looking relieved. Another executive followed. Then another. Finally, an assistant appeared. "Mr. and Mrs. Moyo." Tawanda stood. Nyasha's legs felt weak as they entered the room. The conference room was surprisingly simple. No photographers, no board members, only one large wooden table, a pot of freshly brewed tea, 3 chairs. Tendai Dubé stood beside the window overlooking Harare's glowing skyline. He turned as they entered. "Good evening." His voice sounded exactly as it had inside the taxi. Calm, warm, respectful. Tawanda immediately stepped forward. "Mr. Dubé." Before he could continue, Tendai smiled gently. "Please." He gestured toward the chairs. "Sit." They obeyed. For several moments, no one spoke. Tendai poured 3 cups of tea himself. Then he placed one before each of them. "Thank you for coming." Tawanda cleared his throat. "Sir." Again, Tendai raised a hand politely. "There will be time." His tone contained no hostility, only patience. Finally, he looked toward Nyasha. She immediately lowered her eyes. "I imagine this has been a difficult evening." Her voice barely emerged. "Yes, I can see that." Silence returned. Nyasha could no longer bear it. She stood abruptly. "I'm sorry." The words escaped almost involuntarily. "I behaved terribly." Her eyes filled with tears. "I insulted you. I judged you. I embarrassed you in front of everyone." She struggled to breathe. "I have no excuse." The room remained quiet. Tendai listened without interrupting. She continued. "I didn't know." Then she stopped herself. Slowly, she shook her head. No, that's not true. She looked directly at him for the first time. It shouldn't matter whether I knew. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. I should never have treated anyone that way. Tendai remained silent. His calmness encouraged her to continue. I've been ashamed since the moment I saw you walk into that ballroom. I've wanted to apologize all evening. I know saying sorry cannot erase what I did. She swallowed hard. But I truly am sorry. The room became completely still. After several seconds, Tendai spoke. Thank you. Nyasha blinked. That wasn't the response she expected. He continued gently. It takes courage to admit when we're wrong. She whispered, I don't feel courageous. You came anyway. I almost didn't. But you did. He looked toward Tawanda. And you, Tawanda inhaled slowly. I don't know what to say. Then say what is true. The younger man nodded. I've always believed this company stood for integrity. It does. I've tried to live by that. You have. But tonight, his voice grew heavier. My wife failed those values. He paused. And because we're family, so did I. Tendai studied him carefully. Do you believe you are responsible for another adult's choices? Tawanda hesitated. No. Then why accept responsibility? Because I should have helped her become a better person. Nyasha looked toward her husband in surprise. He wasn't blaming her. He was blaming himself. That hurt even more. Tendai leaned back thoughtfully. Marriage is a partnership. Yes, but it isn't ownership. Neither replied. After another moment, Tendai asked a simple question. Tell me. He looked directly at Nyasha. When you entered my taxi, what was the first thing you noticed? She answered honestly. The car. And after that, your clothes. And after that, she hesitated. I assumed. What? That you weren't successful. Tendai nodded slowly. And during the journey? Did you ask anything about my life? No. My family? No. My work? No. My dreams? Again, no. He smiled sadly. So, everything you believed about me came from what you saw. Nyasha quietly nodded. Tendai looked toward the window. That happens every day. His voice remained calm. Not only to me, to cleaners, security guards, taxi drivers, street vendors, elderly people, children. He turned back toward them. The tragedy isn't that wealthy people exist. The tragedy is when wealth becomes the measure of human worth. Those words settled deeply inside the room. Neither Nyasha nor Tawanda spoke. For the first time in many years, Nyasha realized that she had spent more energy trying to appear important than trying to become kind. And suddenly, every expensive dress, every luxury handbag, every prestigious invitation felt strangely empty. She had spent years chasing admiration, yet in a single evening she had met a man who possessed unimaginable wealth and still treated everyone with the quiet dignity she herself had forgotten. The conversation was only beginning, but already something inside Nyasha had started to change. The quiet conference room remained still after Tendai's final words. Outside the glass windows, the lights of Harare shimmered against the evening sky. The distant sounds of music from the ballroom drifted faintly through the hallway, but inside the room, no one spoke for several long moments. Nyasha stared down at the untouched cup of tea in front of her. For the first time in years, she found herself questioning not a single decision, but the entire way she had been living. Tendai finally broke the silence. May I tell you a story? Both Nyasha and Tawanda nodded. When I was 24, Tendai began, I owned exactly one taxi. A faint smile crossed his face. It wasn't even mine. I rented it from another driver because I couldn't afford to buy one. He folded his hands calmly on the table. One rainy afternoon, I picked up an elderly schoolteacher. Nyasha listened carefully. She wore old clothes. Her shoes were badly worn. I assumed she couldn't afford much. He paused. So I drove her without expecting a generous fare. What happened? Tawanda asked quietly. When we arrived, she paid exactly what the meter showed. He smiled softly. Then she thanked me as though I had done something extraordinary. Tendai looked toward the window before continuing. Before leaving, she told me something I never forgot. He repeated the words slowly. Young man, never let poverty teach you to disrespect yourself, and never let success teach you to disrespect others. The room became silent again. I carried those words with me every day. Tendai looked toward Nyasha. Even after I became wealthy. Nyasha lowered her head. I wish someone had taught me that. Tendai smiled gently. Perhaps someone did. She looked confused. We simply hear certain lessons only when we're ready. His words settled deeply within her. She remembered her own grandmother. When she was a little girl, her grandmother had greeted every neighbor with warmth, whether they were doctors, gardeners, or street vendors. As a child, Nyasha had admired that kindness. Somewhere along the years, ambition had quietly replaced compassion. She had convinced herself that appearing successful mattered more than treating people well. Now she could see how gradually that change had happened. It hadn't occurred overnight. It had happened one small judgment at a time, one assumption after another, one careless remark after the next, until kindness no longer came naturally. Tendai turned toward Tawanda. I've watched your work for several years. Tawanda looked surprised. You have? I have. I thought we'd never met. We haven't. Not officially. A small smile appeared on Tendai's face. But I've read reports. I've spoken with junior employees. I've visited branches without announcing myself. You never knew. Tawanda nodded slowly. I always believed someone was paying attention. They were. Tendai leaned slightly forward. Do you know why your name reached the top of every promotion list? Tawanda hesitated. My department performed well. Yes. You reduced operating costs. Yes. You developed future leaders. I tried. But none of those reasons placed you first. Tawanda looked puzzled. What did... Tendai answered without hesitation. How people described you. He continued. Receptionists said you remembered their names. Security guards said you greeted them every morning. Drivers said you never left the office without thanking them. Junior analysts said you stayed after work to help them improve. Tawanda felt a lump form in his throat. I never expected anyone to notice. Tendai smiled. Leadership is easiest to recognize among people who have nothing to gain from praising you. Those words carried more weight than any business award. For years, Tawanda had tried to lead quietly, not because he expected recognition, simply because he believed it was right. Now he realized someone had been watching all along. Nyasha listened silently. She suddenly understood why her husband earned such deep respect. It had never been because of his title. It had always been because of his character. She felt ashamed remembering how often she had complained that he wasn't ambitious enough. In reality, he had been pursuing something far more valuable than status. He had been building trust. Tendai looked toward both of them. I'd like to ask another question. They nodded. If tonight had happened differently... He paused. If I truly had been nothing more than an ordinary taxi driver... He looked directly at Nyasha. Would your apology still matter? The question struck her immediately. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she took several slow breaths. Finally, she spoke. Earlier tonight, she admitted honestly, I probably would have forgotten you before I reached the ballroom." Her voice trembled. "But now—" She wiped away another tear. "I don't think I'll ever forget you." Tendai waited. "My apology isn't because you're wealthy." She shook her head firmly. "It's because I finally understand the person I became." She looked directly into his eyes. "And I don't like her." No one spoke. Then Tendai nodded once. "That answer gives me hope." Nyasha looked surprised. "Hope? People rarely change because someone humiliates them." He smiled gently. "They change when they begin telling themselves the truth." Those words lingered in the room. Outside the conference room, Fari quietly checked his schedule. Several board members waited for Tendai's next meeting, but none interrupted. Farai knew his chairman well. If Tendai chose to spend extra time with someone, there was always a reason. Inside, the conversation continued. Tendai stood and walked toward the window. "When I drive that taxi," he looked out across the city lights, "I meet extraordinary people." He smiled. A nurse who works double shifts to educate her younger brothers. A mechanic saving money to send his daughter to university. A widow selling vegetables after losing everything. He turned back toward them. They rarely speak about money. They speak about family, hope, responsibility, faith. His expression softened. "I've learned more about leadership inside that old taxi than in any boardroom." Nyasha found herself smiling faintly for the first time that evening. Not because the tension had disappeared, but because she finally understood why a billionaire would continue driving strangers through Harare. It had never been about transportation. It had been about staying connected to humanity. Tendai returned to the table. "There is one final matter we should discuss." Both Nyasha and Tawanda immediately became serious again. The promotion. Neither had mentioned it since entering the room. Yet all three knew the decision still hung quietly over the evening. Tendai folded his hands once more. "What I'm about to say will affect both of your futures." Nyasha instinctively reached for Tawanda's hand. This time he didn't pull away. Together they waited for the words that could either end 15 years of dedication or begin an entirely new chapter in their lives. The atmosphere inside the conference room grew even quieter. Nyasha instinctively tightened her grip on Tawanda's hand. He gently squeezed hers in return, though his own heart was racing. For years he had dreamed of becoming executive director. Not for prestige, not for a larger office, certainly not for a higher salary. He believed the position would allow him to improve the lives of thousands of employees working across Dubai Capital's growing network of companies. Yet now none of that seemed certain. Tendai looked at both of them before speaking. "I know what you're both expecting." Neither answered. "You believe this conversation is about a promotion." He smiled faintly. "It isn't." Nyasha blinked in surprise. Tawanda remained still. Tendai continued. "A promotion is only a title." He folded his hands on the table. "But titles never create leaders. They simply reveal whether leadership already exists." He turned toward Tawanda. "I've spent years observing your work." Tawanda listened carefully. "I've received hundreds of reports. I've spoken with employees from every level of this company. I've even visited branches without announcing who I was." Tawanda nodded slowly. "I understand." "No." Tendai smiled gently. "I don't think you do." He reached into a leather folder resting on the table and removed several handwritten notes. "I'd like to read a few comments." He adjusted his glasses. "When my wife became seriously ill, Mr. Moyo arranged flexible working hours without making me feel ashamed." He placed the paper aside. Another followed. "When I made a costly mistake during my first month, everyone expected me to be dismissed. Mr. Moyo stayed after work for 3 evenings, teaching me how to improve instead." Another. Every Christmas, he personally thanks the cleaning staff before leaving the building. Another. He treats drivers and executives exactly the same. The room fell silent. Tendai looked toward Tawanda. Do you recognize these people? He shook his head. No. That's what impressed me. Tendai smiled. You helped them without expecting recognition. Tawanda lowered his eyes. My father always said. He hesitated. The way you treat people who cannot reward you reveals who you really are. Tendai nodded with approval. A wise man. He was. The billionaire carefully returned the papers to the folder. I've met many brilliant executives. He paused. I've met fewer good human beings. Nyasha listened quietly. Every compliment directed toward her husband filled her with both pride and regret. She had often encouraged him to become tougher, to think more aggressively, to focus only on results. Now she realized that the qualities she once considered weaknesses were exactly what made him extraordinary. Tendai slowly turned toward her. May I ask you something? Of course. When you married Tawanda, what made you fall in love with him? The unexpected question caught her off guard. She smiled faintly through lingering tears. He was kind. She looked toward her husband. He listened. He respected everyone. He never tried to impress people. Her smile faded. Somewhere along the way, she swallowed. I started believing those qualities weren't enough. She looked down. I wanted a bigger house, a better social circle, more recognition. I convinced myself that success meant people admiring us. She shook her head slowly. I stopped noticing that they already respected him. Tawanda quietly reached over and covered her hand with his own. For the first time that evening, genuine warmth returned between them. Tendai watched silently before speaking again. Success can be dangerous. Both looked toward him, not because wealth changes people. He paused, but because it often reveals desires that were already there. Nyasha nodded thoughtfully. I understand that now. I believe you do. The billionaire stood and walked slowly toward a bookshelf lining one wall of the conference room. Among several framed photographs sat a small faded picture in a simple wooden frame. He picked it up carefully. This was taken 28 years ago. He handed it to them. The photograph showed a much younger Tendai standing beside an old blue taxi. His clothes were modest, his smile wide. Beside him stood an elderly woman. My mother. Nyasha examined the picture carefully. She worked as a housekeeper. Tendai smiled softly. For 34 years. He looked at the photograph with affection. Many of the people she served never learned her name. They simply called her maid. He gently traced the edge of the frame. But every evening, he smiled. She came home proud. Why? Nyasha asked quietly. Because she believed dignity came from honesty, not occupation. He replaced the photograph. When I became successful, I promised myself something. What? I would never allow wealth to convince me that my mother's work made her less valuable than anyone else. His voice remained calm. So I continue driving. So I continue meeting ordinary people. So I continue reminding myself where I came from. Nyasha felt another wave of emotion. She suddenly thought about the hotel cleaners preparing the ballroom before guests arrived, the parking attendants welcoming expensive cars, the waiters who had served dinner with smiling faces. How many times had she overlooked people like them? How many names had she never bothered to learn? The realization was painful, yet strangely freeing. For the first time in years, she wanted to change rather than simply appear successful. Tendai returned to the table. There is something else. Both listened attentively. Tomorrow morning, the board will officially announce our new executive director. Tawanda remained calm, though his pulse quickened. Tendai smiled. My decision was actually finalized 3 weeks ago. Nyasha looked surprised. Before tonight? Long before. So? She hesitated. My actions tonight, they did not influence the promotion. Relief washed over Tawanda's face, not because he had secured the position, but because justice mattered. He wanted to earn leadership through merit, not lose it because of another person's mistake. Tendai seemed to understand exactly what he was thinking. I would never punish an employee for another adult's behavior. Tawanda quietly nodded. Thank you. But, Tendai added gently, there is something far more important than tomorrow's announcement. The room became still again. If you become executive director, he looked directly at Tawanda, thousands of employees will observe not only how you lead, they will also observe your family. Tawanda understood immediately. Leadership did not end at the office door. It extended into every relationship, every conversation, every public moment. He turned toward Nyasha. She met his eyes with quiet determination. I'll earn back that trust. She spoke softly. Not with promises. But with the way I live, Tendai smiled. Good. He walked toward the conference room door and rested one hand on the handle. I believe people deserve a second chance. He looked back at them. But second chances have value only when they become first steps. With that, he opened the door. Outside, the hallway waited in silence. Beyond it, an entirely new future stood waiting for all three of them. When Tawanda and Nyasha stepped out of the conference room, the hallway felt strangely different. Only an hour earlier, they had walked through those same polished corridors, carrying fear, uncertainty, and embarrassment. Now they carried something else. Perspective. Neither spoke as they slowly made their way back toward the ballroom. Finally, Nyasha broke the silence. Tawanda. He turned toward her. I'm sorry. He smiled gently. You've already said that. I know. She stopped walking. But this time I'm not apologizing because I'm afraid of the consequences. He waited quietly. I'm apologizing because I finally understand how deeply I hurt people without realizing it. Tawanda looked into her eyes. For the first time that evening, he saw no trace of pride, no defensiveness, only sincerity. He nodded. I believe you. She exhaled slowly as though a heavy weight had finally lifted from her shoulders. I've spent years trying to impress strangers. She laughed softly at herself, and somehow I forgot to become someone worth admiring. Tawanda gently placed a hand on her shoulder. People can change. I hope so. They can. They resumed walking together. As they entered the ballroom, the atmosphere had become lighter. A jazz band now played on the stage, while guests chatted comfortably over coffee and dessert. No one seemed aware of the emotional conversation that had just taken place behind closed doors. Farai noticed Tawanda returning and approached immediately. There you are. He smiled warmly. I was beginning to wonder if Mr. Dubé had recruited you for another meeting. Tawanda laughed politely. It was a meaningful conversation. Farai studied his face for a moment. You look different. You look lighter. Tawanda glanced toward Nyasha before answering. I think we both are. Farai smiled without asking further questions. Mr. Dubé has already left for another engagement. Nyasha looked surprised. He left? He dislikes long public appearances. Farai chuckled. He always says that the company belongs to its people, not to his photograph. Nyasha smiled faintly. That sounded exactly like the man she had met. Simple, unassuming, authentic. Farai excused himself to greet another group of executives. Meanwhile, several colleagues gathered around Tawanda. How was the meeting? What did Mr. Duba say? Did he mention tomorrow's announcement? Tawanda simply smiled. We had a good conversation. Julius laughed. That's all you're going to tell us? I'm afraid so. You've become even more mysterious. The group laughed together before drifting toward another table. Throughout the remainder of the evening, Nyasha found herself noticing people she had previously overlooked. She watched a young waitress quietly refill glasses before anyone had to ask. She noticed an elderly cleaner discreetly polishing fingerprints from a glass door after guests walked through. She saw a security guard helping an elderly visitor down a short flight of steps with remarkable patience. None of them expected applause. None of them seemed interested in recognition. Yet without them, the elegant evening would never have been possible. For the first time, Nyasha walked over to the waitress. Thank you. The young woman looked surprised. For what? Madam, for taking such good care of everyone tonight. The waitress smiled warmly. You're very kind. Nyasha almost laughed. If only she knew. Later, as the gala came to an end, guests slowly made their way toward the hotel entrance. Luxury cars lined the driveway once again. Drivers opened doors. Valets hurried between vehicles. Business leaders exchanged final handshakes before leaving. Tawanda and Nyasha walked outside together. The cool evening air felt refreshing after hours inside the ballroom. Near the entrance, Nyasha noticed the same security supervisor who had witnessed the incident earlier. He recognized her immediately. For a brief moment, both hesitated. Then Nyasha walked directly toward him. Good evening. The supervisor nodded politely. Good evening, madam. She took a slow breath. I owe you an apology. His eyebrows rose slightly. For earlier. I behaved in a way I'm deeply ashamed of. The supervisor remained silent. I created an unpleasant situation while you were simply doing your job. She lowered her head. I'm sorry. The supervisor smiled kindly. Thank you. It means a great deal to hear that. She smiled back. I also wanted to ask something. Of course. If you ever see Mr. Dube again. The supervisor chuckled softly. I imagine I will. Please thank him once more. I will. As they walked toward their vehicle, Tawanda glanced at his wife. I'm proud of you. She looked surprised. I've made a terrible mess. You have. He smiled. But you're cleaning it up. She squeezed his hand. I'm going to keep cleaning. The drive home was unusually quiet. Unlike most evenings, neither of them turned on the radio. Instead, they simply watched the city lights pass outside the windows. After several minutes, Nyasha spoke again. When I was little, she smiled faintly. My grandmother used to make me greet every person we passed. Tawanda listened. I hated it. Why? I thought it was embarrassing. She laughed softly. She always said, every person carries a story you cannot see. What happened? I forgot. She looked out the window. I remembered tonight. Back at their home in Borrowdale, the house was silent. The domestic staff had already gone home. Nyasha slowly walked into the spacious living room. The expensive furniture, the imported artwork, the designer decorations. Everything looked exactly the same as it had that morning. Yet somehow, the house felt different. She walked toward a large mirror hanging near the staircase. For several moments, she simply stared at her reflection. The elegant gown, the flawless makeup, the diamond earrings. Hours earlier, those things had made her feel important. Now they seemed strangely insignificant. Tawanda quietly joined her. What are you thinking? She smiled sadly. I've spent so much time decorating the outside. She touched the mirror lightly. I almost forgot to care for the person inside. He wrapped an arm gently around her shoulders. Then tomorrow is a good day to begin. She leaned against him. No. He looked puzzled. She smiled. Not tomorrow. She looked toward the front door. Right now. Upstairs, she carefully removed the jewelry that had once felt like symbols of success. Downstairs, Tawanda switched off the living room lights. Neither of them realized that while they slept that night, the board of Duby Capital was preparing an announcement that would change not only Tawanda's career, but also give Nyasha an unexpected opportunity to prove that her transformation was more than words. The true test of change would begin with the sunrise. The first rays of sunlight spread across Harare as Nyasha stood alone in the kitchen, watching the kettle begin to boil. Normally, she would have still been asleep while the housekeeper prepared breakfast. This morning was different. She had woken before dawn without an alarm. Her mind had replayed the previous evening again and again until sleep became impossible. She quietly prepared tea for herself and Tawanda. When he entered the kitchen a few minutes later, he stopped in surprise. "You made breakfast," Nyasha smiled. "It isn't much." On the table sat 2 cups of tea toast, fresh fruit, and scrambled eggs. "It looks perfect." He pulled out a chair. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." As they ate together, neither mentioned the gala. Neither mentioned Tendai. They simply enjoyed a peaceful breakfast that reminded them of the early years of their marriage before ambition had gradually replaced simplicity. After clearing the dishes, Tawanda checked the time. "I should leave." Nyasha walked him to the front door. She straightened his tie, something she had not done in a long time. "Nervous?" He smiled. "A little." "You've earned whatever happens today." He kissed her forehead. "Thank you." As he walked toward his car, Nyasha called after him. "Tawanda." He turned. "No matter what happens today," she smiled warmly, "I'm already proud of you." He nodded before driving away. For the first time in years, he carried those words with him instead of pressure. Dubai Capital headquarters buzzed with unusual excitement. Employees gathered in small groups throughout the building. Some believed the executive director announcement would happen before noon. Others guessed it would come after lunch. No one knew for certain. Inside the executive floor, Tawanda greeted the reception staff as he always did. "Good morning, Miriam." "Morning, Mr. Moyo. How is your son recovering?" Her face brightened. "Much better, thank you." "I'm glad." Nearby, a young intern watched the conversation. After Tawanda disappeared into the elevator, the intern turned toward Miriam. "He remembers your son's name." She smiled proudly. "He remembers everyone's." Meanwhile, across town, Nyasha sat quietly in the living room. Her phone vibrated repeatedly. Messages flooded in from friends who had attended the gala. Did Tawanda get the promotion? What happened after dinner? Tell us everything. She looked at the screen before placing the phone face down. For the first time, she felt no desire to discuss exclusive events or important people. Instead, another thought occupied her mind. She picked up her handbag, and left the house. Half an hour later, she arrived at the Rainbow Towers Hotel. The same entrance, the same driveway, the same place where she had publicly humiliated Tendai. Her heart beat faster as she stepped inside. The security supervisor recognized her immediately. "Good morning, madam." "Good morning." She smiled nervously. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all. I came because—" She hesitated. "There's something I need to do." The supervisor waited patiently. Nyasha looked around until she noticed the hotel attendants preparing for another busy day. The same porter, the same waitress, the same cleaner polishing the marble floor. She slowly walked toward them. The cleaner looked up first. Good morning. Nyasha smiled gently. Good morning. She took a slow breath. I wanted to apologize. The three employees exchanged confused glances. For yesterday, she continued, you witnessed me treating someone with disrespect. Her voice remained steady. I cannot change what happened, but I can admit that I was wrong. The elderly cleaner smiled kindly. We all make mistakes. Nyasha nodded. Yes, but not everyone takes responsibility. The waitress stepped forward. It takes courage to come back. Nyasha shook her head. No, it takes courage to forgive. The women smiled warmly. For the first time since the gala, Nyasha felt a small measure of peace. Back at Dubai Capital, Farai entered the executive boardroom carrying a sealed envelope. Every director had already taken a seat. Tendai sat quietly at the head of the table. Farai placed the envelope before him. The final resolution. Tendai opened it carefully. Inside lay the board's unanimous decision. He read it silently before closing the folder. No objections. Every director shook his head. One elderly board member spoke. I've served this company for 21 years. He smiled. I've rarely seen a candidate receive unanimous support. Another director nodded. The employees already see him as a leader. Tendai looked around the table. Then let us make it official. Around 11 o'clock, every employee received a company-wide notification. Mandatory staff assembly. Main auditorium, 11:30 a.m. Within minutes, hundreds of employees began making their way downstairs. Receptionists, engineers, accountants, drivers, security officers, cleaners, managers, everyone gathered together. Tawanda stood among the senior executives near the front. He noticed several cleaners taking seats along the side wall. Without hesitation, he walked over. Please, he smiled. The front rows have empty seats. One cleaner looked embarrassed. Those are for managers. They're for employees. He helped move several chairs before returning to his place. Across the room, Tendai quietly watched from a side entrance. Farai smiled. You noticed? I always do. The auditorium fell silent as Tendai stepped onto the stage. Thunderous applause filled the room. This time everyone recognized his face. He waited patiently until the applause faded. Good morning. His calm voice echoed throughout the hall. Yesterday we celebrated our achievements. Today we prepare for our future. He spoke briefly about growth responsibility and service before reaching the final announcement. Our company has always believed that leadership begins with character. He paused. For that reason, he opened the envelope. The board of directors has unanimously appointed. The entire auditorium held its breath. Mr. Tawanda Moyo. Applause erupted instantly. As the new executive director of Dubai Capital Holdings. The room exploded with cheers. Employees stood, some whistled, others clapped enthusiastically. Several junior staff members hugged one another. The cleaners along the wall smiled proudly. Miriam, the receptionist, wiped away tears. Tawanda remained frozen for several seconds before slowly walking toward the stage. His heart overflowed with gratitude. As he reached Tendai, the billionaire extended his hand. Congratulations. Tawanda accepted it firmly. Thank you. Tendai smiled. You earned this long before yesterday. The applause continued. Yet, neither man realized that the greatest challenge had not been the promotion. It would be living up to everything that promotion now represented. And for Nyasha, proving that her transformation was genuine had only just begun. The applause inside the auditorium continued long after the official announcement. Employees stood shoulder to shoulder celebrating not only Tawanda's promotion, but also the feeling that someone they genuinely respected had been chosen to lead. Tawanda remained beside Tendai for a few moments before stepping to the microphone. He looked across the crowd. Faces filled every corner of the auditorium. Senior executives, receptionists, drivers, maintenance workers, security officers, housekeepers from the company guest residences. People from every level of the organization stood together. He took a slow breath. "Thank you." The room immediately became quiet. "I've prepared presentations for board meetings." A few employees smiled. "I've spoken at investor conferences." Soft laughter followed. "But this is the hardest speech I've ever given." The audience laughed warmly. Tawanda continued, "When I joined this company 15 years ago, I wasn't thinking about becoming an executive director." He smiled. "I was simply hoping someone would give me an opportunity." He paused. Someone did. His eyes turned toward Tendai. "And because one person believed in me, my responsibility today is to believe in others." Applause broke out again. "I promise that my office door will remain open. I promise to listen before making decisions. And I promise that no employee will ever be considered invisible." The final sentence drew the loudest applause of all. Near the back of the auditorium, several cleaning staff exchanged emotional smiles. One elderly janitor quietly wiped his eyes. After the ceremony ended, employees lined up to congratulate Tawanda. Each handshake reminded him why leadership mattered. Not because of authority, because of responsibility. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Tendai approached him. "You handled that well." "I spoke from my heart." "I know." Tendai smiled. "Keep doing that." Before leaving, he added one final sentence. "Your first leadership decision begins this afternoon." Tawanda looked curious. "My first—" The title became official the moment I announced it. With a friendly nod, Tendai walked away. Meanwhile, across the city, Nyasha sat in a small neighborhood cafe after leaving the hotel. The morning had already changed her more than she expected. She watched people passing outside the window. A delivery cyclist stopped to help an elderly man pick up dropped groceries. Two school children shared an umbrella while walking through a brief afternoon shower. Small acts of kindness seemed to appear everywhere once she started paying attention. Her phone rang. It was Tawanda. She answered immediately. "Congratulations." He laughed softly. "You already know. The whole city probably knows. The announcement just finished. I'm so proud of you." "So am I." She smiled. "You sound different." "I feel different." He hesitated. "Mr. Dubé wants you and me to join him for dinner tomorrow evening." Her smile disappeared. "Dinner?" "Just the three of us." She took a deep breath. "Do you think—" She hesitated. "He's giving me another chance." "I think he already has." The following evening arrived quickly. This time, Tawanda and Nyasha drove themselves to a quiet restaurant overlooking Lake Chivero. Unlike the luxurious gala, the restaurant was simple. No photographers, no executives, no grand entrance, only soft music, warm lighting, and a peaceful view across the water. When they arrived, Tendai was already seated at a table near the terrace. He stood with a welcoming smile. "I'm glad you came." Nyasha smiled nervously. "Thank you for inviting us." After they ordered dinner, the conversation began with ordinary topics. Travel, books, Zimbabwe's growing economy, favorite childhood memories. To Nyasha's surprise, Tendai asked very little about business. Instead, he seemed more interested in people. At one point, he smiled at Tawanda. "Do you remember your first day at the company?" Tawanda laughed. "I was terrified. You wore a tie that was much too wide." Nyasha laughed. "I'd like to see that photograph." "There isn't one," Tawanda replied. "Thankfully." The relaxed atmosphere slowly eased everyone's nerves. As dinner continued, Tendai looked toward Nyasha. I heard you returned to the hotel. She nodded. I wanted to apologize. I know. How? The security supervisor called me. She looked surprised. He didn't tell me to embarrass you. He simply wanted me to know that someone had returned to make things right. Nyasha smiled quietly. I still have a long way to go. We all do. Tendai sipped his tea before asking, What have you learned since the gala? She thought carefully before answering. I used to believe kindness was something successful people chose to give. She shook her head. Now I think kindness is what makes success meaningful. Tendai smiled. That's a good lesson. But I'm afraid. Of what? That I'll slowly become the same person again. He nodded thoughtfully. Real change isn't protected by feelings. She listened closely. It's protected by habits. What kind of habits? Learning names. Saying thank you. Listening. Helping when no one is watching. He smiled warmly. Character grows through repetition. Those words stayed with her. Not grand promises. Simple daily choices. Several weeks passed. News of Tawanda's promotion spread throughout the company. His leadership style remained exactly as employees expected. He continued arriving early. He visited every department during his first month. He met personally with maintenance crews, drivers, receptionists, and cafeteria staff before holding meetings with senior executives. Many employees were surprised. Tawanda wasn't. He remembered Tendai's lesson. No employee should ever feel invisible. Nyasha also began changing quietly. Instead of attending every exclusive social event, she volunteered twice each week at a community education center that helped young women develop professional skills. She rarely spoke about it. She simply showed up. One Saturday morning, she helped organize donated business clothing for women preparing for job interviews. An elderly volunteer smiled. You fold shirts like someone who's never done this before. Nyasha laughed. I haven't. Then why are you here? She paused before answering. Because someone reminded me that dignity belongs to everyone. The volunteer nodded without asking further questions. That afternoon, as Nyasha carried several boxes toward the entrance, she noticed an old blue taxi stopping across the street. The driver remained inside only a moment before continuing on. She smiled. She couldn't tell whether it was Tendai or another driver. It didn't matter. The sight of that old taxi no longer reminded her of humiliation. It reminded her of the day her life began changing. Some lessons arrived through books, others through success. The most important one had arrived through a quiet taxi ride that lasted less than 30 minutes, but transformed the direction of her future forever. And although neither she nor Tawanda realized it, yet one final gathering awaited them, a gathering where Tendai would reveal why he believed true wealth could never be measured by money alone. Nearly 6 months passed after the gala. Spring transformed Harare with blooming jacaranda trees, clear blue skies, and streets filled with purple blossoms. At Duby Capital Holdings, the changes brought by Tawanda's leadership had become impossible to ignore. Employee turnover had fallen dramatically. Productivity had increased. Customer satisfaction had reached the highest level in the company's history. Yet, the achievement people talked about most wasn't found in financial reports. It was the atmosphere. Employees smiled more. Departments cooperated instead of competing. Junior staff felt comfortable sharing ideas with senior managers. Even visitors noticed the difference the moment they entered the headquarters. One Monday morning, Miriam the receptionist greeted a nervous young graduate attending his first interview. "Don't worry," she said with a reassuring smile. "You'll be treated with respect here." The young man looked surprised. "You sound very confident." She laughed softly. "I've worked here for 12 years. I've never seen this company feel more human." Upstairs, Tawanda was holding his weekly leadership meeting. Instead of beginning with financial targets, he asked a different question. What is one thing your team accomplished this week that had nothing to do with profit? The managers exchanged curious looks. Finally, one spoke. Our logistics department helped an employee rebuild his home after a fire. Another added, the finance team organized scholarships for employees' children. A third smiled. The maintenance crew repaired playground equipment at a nearby public school over the weekend. Tawanda nodded with satisfaction. Those are the stories I want to hear. One manager asked, shouldn't we focus on business performance first? Tawanda smiled. When people know they matter, performance usually follows. The room fell thoughtfully silent. His leadership philosophy had gradually changed the culture of the entire company. Not through complicated strategies, through consistent respect. Later that afternoon, Tawanda received a message from Tendai. Dinner tonight, my home. 7 o'clock, nothing more. That was typical of Tendai. Simple, direct. After work, Tawanda and Nyasha drove to Tendai's residence on the outskirts of Harare. They expected another luxurious mansion, similar to those owned by other billionaires. Instead, they found a beautiful but surprisingly modest home, surrounded by large indigenous trees and flowering gardens. The security was discreet, the architecture elegant without being extravagant. Nyasha smiled. This feels peaceful. Tawanda nodded. It suits him. Tendai welcomed them personally at the front door. I'm glad you came. He led them through the house. Family photographs lined the hallway. Pictures of his late mother, his late wife, his children, grandchildren playing in the garden. There were no oversized portraits celebrating wealth or business achievements. Instead, every photograph told a story of family. Nyasha paused before one framed picture. It showed Tendai standing beside the same old blue taxi. This time several smiling children sat inside it. You kept it. Tendai smiled warmly. I still drive it. She laughed. I know. No. He grinned. I mean yesterday. Her eyes widened. You still use it? Every week. But why? He looked at the photograph for a long moment. Because it reminds me that my value doesn't change when people fail to recognize me. They continued into the dining room. The meal was simple. Roasted chicken, fresh vegetables, homemade bread, fruit for dessert, nothing extravagant. Halfway through dinner, Tendai stood. I'd like to show you something. He disappeared briefly before returning with a small wooden box. Inside lay dozens of folded pieces of paper. Nyasha looked curious. What are those? Letters. From whom? Employees. He handed the box to Tawanda. I've collected them for years. Tawanda unfolded one carefully. It had been written by a cleaner. Thank you for stopping to help me carry heavy supplies when everyone else walked past. He opened another. A young accountant had written, Thank you for encouraging me after I failed my first presentation. Another came from a security guard. You remembered my daughter's graduation and asked how she was doing months later. Tawanda looked up. You kept these? Tendai nodded. They remind me what truly builds a company. Nyasha quietly unfolded another letter. It wasn't addressed to Tendai. It had been written years earlier by one of the company's receptionists. Mr. Dubé thanked me every morning for opening the office before sunrise. No executive had ever done that before. She slowly folded the paper again. Tears filled her eyes. So many small moments. Tendai smiled. There are no small acts of kindness. He looked around the table. Only acts whose importance we haven't yet understood. After dinner, they moved onto the terrace overlooking the gardens. The evening air carried the scent of flowering trees. Crickets chirped softly in the distance. For several minutes, no one spoke. Finally, Tendai broke the silence. "Do you know why I invited you here tonight?" Tawanda shook his head. "I wanted you to see something." "What?" He looked toward the peaceful garden. "This house. The letters. The old taxi. They all exist for the same reason." Nyasha listened carefully. "They remind me every day that everything I own can disappear." He paused. "But the way I treat people, that remains." Silence settled over the terrace. The words felt even more powerful than they had inside the conference room months earlier. Tendai turned toward Nyasha. "How is the education center?" She smiled. "I've been volunteering every week." "I heard." She laughed. "You hear everything." "I hear enough." She looked down thoughtfully. "The women there have taught me far more than I've taught them." "What have they taught you?" "Gratitude." She smiled. "And resilience." Tendai nodded. "Then you're learning from the right teachers." Before the evening ended, Tendai walked them to the front gate. As Tawanda prepared to leave, Tendai placed one hand on his shoulder. "I have one final request. Anything. When people praise your leadership," he smiled gently, "don't let them forget the people who made it possible." "I won't." "And when they praise your success," he glanced toward Nyasha, "remember the lesson that changed both of your lives." They nodded together. Driving home beneath the starlit sky, neither spoke for several minutes. Finally, Nyasha smiled. "I used to think the richest person in Zimbabwe was the man with the most money." Tawanda glanced toward her. "What do you think now?" She looked out at the quiet city lights. "I think the richest person is the one who leaves everyone feeling more valuable after meeting him." Tawanda smiled. She finally understood, not just the lesson, but the life behind it. Only one chapter remained, a chapter that would reveal how a single act of humility could inspire thousands of others to choose kindness over status and respect over appearances. 1 year after the unforgettable gala at Rainbow Towers Hotel, Dubai capital, Holdings celebrated another annual leadership conference. This time, the atmosphere felt completely different. Employees no longer whispered nervously about promotions. Instead, they spoke proudly about new mentorship programs, community projects, and the company's growing reputation as one of the best places to work in Zimbabwe. Visitors from neighboring countries had come to study Dubai capital's leadership culture. Many expected to hear about innovative business strategies or financial planning. Instead, they found something much simpler. People genuinely cared for one another. The conference auditorium quickly filled with employees from every department. Receptionists sat beside senior executives. Drivers chatted comfortably with department heads. Maintenance workers laughed with accountants over coffee before the program began. No seating section was reserved according to rank. That decision had been one of Tawanda's first changes after becoming executive director. He believed respect should never depend on a job title. Backstage, Tawanda reviewed his opening remarks. Farai approached with a smile. "You've become comfortable on this stage." Tawanda laughed. "I still get nervous." "Good." Farai adjusted his jacket. Nervous leaders usually remember they're serving people. A few moments later, the lights dimmed. Applause filled the auditorium as Tawanda walked onto the stage. He waited patiently before speaking. "Good morning, everyone." Hundreds of voices answered together. "Good morning," he smiled. "A year ago, many of us gathered in this same room to celebrate new beginnings." He paused. "Today, I'd like to celebrate something even more important." He looked across the audience. Growth. The large screen behind him displayed photographs from company volunteer projects throughout the year. Employees rebuilding schools, planting trees, donating blood, mentoring students, helping elderly community members repair their homes. None of the pictures featured expensive offices or business awards. Instead, they showed ordinary people serving others. Tawanda continued, "Our financial results have exceeded expectations." Applause followed. "But those numbers are not what make me proud." He gestured toward the screen. "These moments do." The audience applauded even louder. Among those seated near the front was Nyasha. She smiled while watching her husband. 1 year earlier, she had cared deeply about who noticed her dress. Today, she wore a simple navy blue outfit and felt completely at peace. Beside her sat several women from the education center where she volunteered every weekend. She had insisted they attend as honored guests, not because they were wealthy, because they had become friends. When Tawanda finished speaking, he invited one final guest onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," his smile widened, "the man whose example continues to guide all of us." The audience immediately stood. Tendai Dubé walked calmly toward the podium. Just as he had the previous year, he accepted the applause with quiet humility. After the room settled, he looked across the crowd. "I've been asked many times during the past year." He smiled gently. "Oh, what leadership secret transformed our company?" Soft laughter spread through the audience. He continued, "People expect me to mention strategy, technology, investment." He shook his head. "The answer is much simpler." He paused before saying, "We decided that every person matters." Silence filled the room. "It sounds ordinary," he smiled, "but ordinary truths often create extraordinary results." He looked toward the employees seated throughout the auditorium. When a cleaner feels respected, they care more for the building. When a receptionist feels appreciated, they welcome visitors with genuine warmth. When a manager listens, teams begin trusting one another. He paused again. And when leaders remember that titles never make anyone more human, they create places where everyone can succeed. Thunderous applause echoed through the hall. Tendai then surprised everyone. He stepped away from the podium and walked down into the audience. Instead of greeting executives first, he stopped beside an elderly maintenance worker. "What is your name?" The man smiled nervously. "Joseph." "How many years have you worked here, Joseph?" 23. Tendai extended his hand. "Thank you." The audience watched quietly. Next, he greeted a young intern, then a cafeteria employee, then one of the security guards. Every handshake carried the same warmth, the same respect, the same sincerity. No one received more attention because of status. Watching from the front row, Nyasha felt tears fill her eyes once again. She remembered the woman she had been only a year earlier, a woman who judged worth by appearances, a woman who believed expensive things created important people. That woman felt like someone from another lifetime. After the conference ended, employees gathered outside beneath the blooming jacaranda trees. Groups posed for photographs. Children laughed while chasing one another across the lawn. The atmosphere felt more like a family celebration than a corporate event. Nyasha noticed a familiar sight near the parking area, an old blue taxi. She smiled immediately. Walking over, she found Tendai leaning casually against the driver's door. "You brought it." "I promised I always would." She laughed. "I don't think I'll ever see this taxi the same way again." "I hope not." She became quiet. "May I tell you something?" "Of course." "A year ago." She looked at the faded blue paint. "I thought this was the most embarrassing vehicle I'd ever seen." She smiled through tears. "Now, I think it's the most beautiful." Tendai laughed warmly. "The taxi hasn't changed." She nodded. "I know." "I did." At that moment, Tawanda joined them. He looked at the old taxi before smiling. "Would you mind," he hesitated, "giving us one more ride?" Tendai grinned. "It would be my pleasure." The three climbed inside, just as they had 1 year earlier. Only everything had changed. This time laughter filled the journey. No pride, no judgment, no fear, only gratitude. As the old blue taxi rolled gently through the streets of Harare, pedestrians barely glanced at it. To them, it was simply another aging taxi carrying 3 ordinary passengers. But inside sat 3 people, forever connected by one unexpected encounter that had transformed their understanding of success, leadership, and human dignity. Sometimes life's greatest lessons do not arrive in luxury cars or grand boardrooms. Sometimes they arrive quietly behind the wheel of an old blue taxi, driven by someone who understands that true wealth is never measured by money, but by the respect we show to people who can offer us nothing in return. Every day, we make hundreds of choices that seem small and insignificant. We decide whether to smile at a stranger, thank a cleaner, greet a security guard, or show patience to someone serving us. Most of the time, we believe these moments will be forgotten, but in reality, they reveal the kind of person we truly are. Wealth, success, and social status may open doors, but they can never replace kindness, humility, or integrity. A person's character is not measured by how they treat powerful people, but by how they treat those who have nothing to offer in return. Nyasha's journey reminds us that the greatest transformations rarely begin with a promotion, a fortune, or public recognition. They begin the moment we are willing to face our own flaws with honesty. Admitting that we were wrong is never a sign of weakness. It is the first step toward becoming someone better. Likewise, Tendai teaches us that true greatness does not need to announce itself. The strongest leaders lead through quiet actions, respect every individual, and never allow success to erase the memory of where they came from. Life has a remarkable way of returning the respect we give to others. Sometimes the person we overlook today may become the one who changes our future tomorrow. More importantly, every human being carries unseen struggles, dreams, and dignity that deserve our compassion. When we choose empathy over judgment and humility over pride, we not only improve someone else's life, we enrich our own. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of an important lesson, we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced a moment that completely changed the way you see other people? Your story may inspire someone else who needs to hear it today. And if you enjoy meaningful stories about kindness, justice, forgiveness, and life's greatest lessons, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our next inspiring story. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.